4. The Woman at the Well. The shadows were dark and the colours grey. It was the month of February. A strong odour of faeces filled the air, along with the hot spice of civet stew and bitter-sweet scent of fermenting purple heather and honey. Pluck's gutter, a now lost medieval village at the edge of the North Yorkshire moors, was bleak, a far cry from the royal courts of Edward III. Mud-splashed pathways wound around ramshackle crook houses, which leaned into each other this way and that, built on wood and wattle, daubed with quick lime and held together with more mud. Moss clung to the yellowed whitewash like a moth-eaten green velvet shroud. At the centre of the village sat a stone well that had been there long before the village. A rotten wooden bucket tied with a worn hemp rope bobbed in the damp-filled breeze on the sepia-stained well water, where the branches of a leafless tree were reflected back up from the murky surface into a bleached out and cloudless sky. Edward, the king's namesake, a travelling preacher and sagacious septuagenarian, sat by the well, back bent over his blackened nails, looking down at his bony fingers through the green-tinged whiteness of his eyes. His keen ears listened to the lapping sound of the water as it curdled against the walls of the well, accompanied by the soft beat of the wooden bucket. A foggy dew dimmed the afternoon light, and the dank air crawled in through the skin like scabies. He pulled the rough Hessian sack tighter around his ancient shoulders. Though he could feel the cold, he was a man of acceptance. Once a minstrel in the court of the Black Prince, now he preached the art of kindness, a rare breed in this god-forsaken land, under the shadow of the castle of John of Gaunt, where bandits and bigotry were the order. It was market day, and most of the villagers were on the far side of the village, bartering over salted fish, horse bread and rotting vegetables. This was the time Mary would come down to the well, knowing she could draw water without fear of harassment or reprisals. She had had more than 5 husbands, each of them dying in turn, and as such was considered a witch. And while to date there had been no talk of a trial, and she hadn't yet been dragged down to the river and drowned, or burnt at the stake in the square, still she was shouted at whenever she showed her face. Seeing the cowled figure hunched over the well gave her a start. Edward looked up from his hooded Hessian covering on hearing her approach. Realizing no threat, Mary continued towards the well. "How fare thee, new in these parts?" she asked with a singular air of confidence for a female, let alone an outcast. Tugging at the hemp rope, she lowered the bucket to draw water from below the scummy surface. "Could I trouble you for a sip? My hands are playing hell with me today. I couldn't get my grip to hold the rope, and my travelling companions are at market collecting supplies," said Edward, lowering his hood and revealing a bald head with crusted and flaking skin. A sparse chaplet of coarse white hair hung around his ears. Taking a small clay pot from the sack she carried, she poured out some water and passed it to the preacher, who politely, bowing his head, placed the cup to his thin liver-versed-coloured lips. The skin of his face had a kiln-baked earthiness, yellowed with age, like the skulls of the Dead Sea, turning a burnt ochre brown in the crevices of his crow's feet. A little of the green tinge in the whites of his eyes peeled away with the drinking of the water. Saying please, he passed back the cup. "So you just passing through?" she asked. "I'll be staying one turn of the moon," he answered quietly. "Well, you'll soon find enough that you shouldn't be talking to the likes of me, or receiving water from my poisoned chalice for that matter." "Oh, I know you well, Mary," he said, "and I know your pain, and the wrongs that have befallen you, and I know you have had more than 5 husbands, and each have died, though it be no fault of your own, yet for it you have suffered." She wore an unusual turquoise robe beneath her coarse woolen mantle, of which she fidgeted nervously as he spoke. "What's your business here?" she asked with a start. "I bring my father's word, and who your father be." Edward looked up to the white sky. "I'm a simple preacher, travelling these barren lands, sowing the seeds of God, in prayer that the pastures I pass will flourish with wheat at harvest. Well, you can be sure, when the people of this place find you've been passing words with me here at the well, they'll be driving you and yours out faster than a sow can swallow her swill. That you and your God can wager a solid gold florin on. I'd wager it myself if I had the means. Be sure that'd be a grand bet." "A fine harvest is all it takes in these hard times to soften souls' hearts," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Mary filled one of the 2 goat's bladders she'd brought along to transport the water, and went to fill the bucket again. A commotion could be heard coming from the muddy pathways. She hurried in her task. "It's been fine passing words with you," she said, hastily tying up the 2nd goat's bladder. "And we will pass words again. You can bet your gold florin on that, lambkin. Go now thy way, and speed thee there absolute," Edward said, pulling his hood back over his scalp. Mary stopped what she was doing, her beauteous skin soft for her years, her eyes a moist hazel. "I believe you to be true, mine own heart's root. Hail be thou," she said, feeling a joy she'd not felt for such a long time now. "Troth," she said, softly, as she lifted the yoke that tied the 2 water carriers, and was halfway up the hill as the villagers, drunk on muscadine, came tumbling into the square from the market.